Despite getting blown out by the Phillies on Friday night, the New York Mets were able to maintain their lead in the wild card race as the Braves lost as well. Can they hold on to that lead before their head-to-head matchup next week? I'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, if there's anybody out there in our audience who was looking for a postcast after the game today, I do want to apologize that I did not jump on live like I had promised on yesterday's show following this game. Since it was a 12-2 loss, I was a little less motivated to rush on a live stream. I didn't think a ton of you would be geared up to spend the rest of your night, your Friday night, focused on the Mets. And I wanted to take my time preparing the show today and not rush just to go live. So I do apologize if you were waiting for me, but I do promise it was with the aim of giving you a better show for today. So let's get into what happened, because this was a really frustrating game on Friday night because the Mets felt like they had early momentum and a couple of bad plays sort of swing things, and one bad inning, just like we've seen the Mets hang some huge innings on on opposing teams this week. It happened to them in the fourth, and the game just got out of hand. But early on, first inning, David Peterson strikes out Kyle Schwarber, gets Trey Turner to fly out, then strikes out Bryce Harper. At that point, considering what he did last Sunday, it felt like Peterson was going to give you another quality start. Meanwhile, Jose Iglesias hits a leadoff homer in the bottom half. Starling Marte gets a base hit. Mark Vientos walks. A wild pitch puts runners in scoring position. You're sitting there with a chance to have a huge inning. But you have to credit the Phillies and Christopher Sanchez in particular. There's a reason why he's been their number 2 starter this year. He just delivered. He strikes out Pete Alonso, and Alonso had a really bad game. Brandon Nimmo grounds out. That scores a run. With a runner still on third base, JD Martinez comes up. His struggles continue. I believe it's an 0 for 30 hitless streak after this game. Has a check swing ground out that strands the runner, and Sanchez able to navigate, again, a situation where he gave up a solo homer and had runners at second and third with nobody out. To only give up one more run in that spot, that's some really good pitching from Sanchez. Now, top of the second inning, David Peterson gives up a pair of base hits to lead things off, but then he gets a shallow pop-up into the outfield. Pete Alonso running back on it. He has to make that play, but unfortunately he didn't. That's another turning point in this game that puts Peterson in a situation where he's got to pitch himself out of a bases-loaded jam with nobody out. Not easy to do. He gives up a sacrifice fly, gets a big strikeout, and if you think back to that pop-up, if it was caught and the same things happen, fly ball, strikeout, Peterson's through that second inning unscathed. Instead, of course, he gives it the one run, but he gets another pop-out that this one, Pete Alonso actually caught, and the Mets hold on to a narrow 2-1 lead. Third inning, David Peterson gets the first 2 outs, but then Bryce Harper gets a base hit. Alec Boehm singles, then Nick Castellanos hits one down the third base line. Harper scores. Brandon Nimmo's throw is wide of the cutoff man, the third baseman, whatever it is. It rolls all the way to the backstop. Alec Boehm tries to score on the play, but it had a hard carom off the wall. Francisco Alvarez fields it, flips it to Peterson. They get the tag on Boehm, so they're able to get a break there, get out of that inning with a tie game, but the momentum had squarely shifted into the Phillies' favor. And in the fourth inning, it just completely fell apart for Peterson and the Mets. Gets a line out to open up the inning, but then gives up a base hit and a pair of doubles to the bottom third of the lineup. So all of a sudden, it's 4-2. He gets Kyle Schwarber to pop out, and Carlos Mendoza goes to the bullpen. Gets Adam Ottavino. Now, Ottavino, you look at his numbers over his last 30 games. I talked about this on yesterday's show. Sub-3 ERA has been very good, yet the Mets have not trusted him in leverage situations. This is a guy who in the past did thrive with runners on. That's what he made a career out of. In times, he would be the guy that would come in, walk two or walk the bases loaded, then strike out the next three. That's just sort of who he is, a guy that typically thrived on the adrenaline. So I understand what Mendoza was trying to do in that spot. You have Trey Turner and Bryce Harper up. David Peterson really struggled against the bottom third of the lineup there. Why have him face Turner and Harper when you can go to a fresh Adam Ottavino? If he stops the bleeding, keeps it a 4-2 game, you rely on your bullpen, maybe you come back and win it. Unfortunately, that's not playing to your strengths. And I think he should have kept David Peterson in there to see if he could have got himself through that inning, just because as bad as it did look in that frame, giving up hits to those bottom third guys in the lineup, I still would have liked to see a guy that's been really good at managing those situations and preventing runs and preventing big innings to get a shot at coming out of it, especially after he got Schwarber out. I would have loved to see him pitch carefully to Trey Turner and then left on left matchup against Bryce Harper. They decided to play a different matchup with Ottavino. He gives up a base hit to Turner. They intentionally walk Harper. Alec Boehm comes up, hits a 3-run homer. All of a sudden, it's 8-2 Phillies. And that's pretty much all she wrote. The Mets did have one more opportunity to grab momentum. And again, mentioning Pete Alonso's rough game, he came up short. This was in the 5th inning. Huascar Brazaban had a scoreless frame. Mets start to rally with 2 outs. Iglesias hits a double over the first base bag. Then you have Starling Marte and Mark Vientos each draw walks to load the bases. Pete Alonso comes up, bases juice, 2 outs. But he struck out. And he struck out on 3 pitches. Now, you can just look at that on the surface, and if you're a Mets fan that wanted to see Alonso come through there, like obviously all of us did, you could just be pissed at Pete. I will say it was great execution by Christopher Sanchez. Backdoor slider, that's not a pitch that you want to hit, although that was the best pitch that Alonso did get in that at bat. But if he would have swung at a backdoor slider with the bases juiced and rolled it over, you all would have been killing him. So you can't fault him for taking that pitch. Where I'm sure a lot of you got upset, as I did, was the ugly swing on the changeup out of the zone. But if you really look at where that pitch was located, it was perfection from Christopher Sanchez. A pitch that starts, in the zone, low and away, and then just fades right out of there. Really tough pitch to lay off of. If he did, it's an even count. Maybe things go differently. Instead, he's down 0-2, and he ends up, getting caught looking on a sinker that caught the black. Just a perfect pitch, again, by Christopher Sanchez to go with the 2-seam and just dot that inside half. It is what it is, because had Pete Alonso ripped a double there and cleared the bases, the game's completely different. But instead, he strikes out, strands everybody, and the Phillies were just able to cruise from there. The next inning, Brazaban gives up a couple of runs in a second inning of work. Danny Young gives up 2 in the 8th inning. The Mets end up losing by a score of 12-2. Phillies get 17 hits. So this is what happens sometimes. The Phillies are a good team. They clinched a playoff berth tonight by winning this game. Actually, I think they would have clinched anyway with the Braves loss. But regardless, they clinch now, and their magic number, it sits at 2. So the next win they have against the Mets in this series, if they're fortunate enough to get one, they will win the NL East for the first time since 2011. So now it's up to the Mets to put a halt to that and do everything they can to win the next 2 games where they're able to avoid the Phillies clinching in their house, but more importantly, where they can maintain this 2-game lead over the Braves going into that huge series next week. I want to talk about that next a little bit, give you your wild card update, your proper one, and also just talk about the game that lies ahead. Sean Manaea on the hill to play stopper. Can he get the job done? We'll discuss it all in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. If you want to go to Atlanta and be there in person, Mets versus Braves this upcoming week, or maybe you want to watch the end of the season in Milwaukee, it's not too late. Go to Booking.com. Between hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more, Booking.com might just be the place to find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks on the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day, so you know who's the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk a little bit here about the NL wildcard race. The Diamondbacks and the Padres won tonight, but luckily the Braves lost. So you look at the top. The Padres now have a 3-game lead over the Mets for the top wildcard spot. The Diamondbacks and Mets came into the day tied. So now the D-backs move up by a game. They now won their second game in a row in that series against the Brewers. They won by a score of 7-4. So they are trending in the right direction here. And the Padres are playing the White Sox this weekend. So we'll see if the Brewers can win a couple games against the Diamondbacks to close out this series. Then the Diamondbacks have the Giants to start the week before their head-to-head matchup against the Padres. We can't rule anything out, but the stage is really being set here for the Padres and the Diamondbacks to maybe handle their remaining schedule until they square off against each other. In which case, the Padres might not have anything left to play for. If the Dodgers are too far ahead and the Padres lock up that first wild card spot, they might just, sort of set up their pitching and let the D-backs, not let them. I'm sure they're going to still play it out, but it could be a situation where the Diamondbacks have an easier final series than we're expecting right now, and they sort of lock into that matchup where the two of them would finish their season playing against each other, and they would just go right into a wild card series. I believe their season ends in Arizona, so then they have to travel to San Diego. Meanwhile, the Mets could finish up in Milwaukee and then just stay there for their wild card matchup if things stay as they presently are, which gets into the fact that this really does feel like it's going to come down, like we've all been predicting for weeks and months now, to Mets Braves in Atlanta. Once again, very similar, eerily similar. A couple years ago when the division was on the line, if the Mets want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to win a series against the Braves in Atlanta. That's what it feels like. Now, things can break in the Mets' favor. Let's just say they win the final 2 games this weekend and somehow the Marlins sweep the Braves. Well, now we're having a completely different conversation, but you can't count on that. I think the best you could hope for was that the Marlins are going to win a game, and they did that. They did a huge favor to the Mets by winning that game tonight by a score of 4-3. Charlie Morton, I've been mentioning Morton starts on this show, haven't I? Been saying that those are opportunities where the Braves might lose games. Well, Charlie Morton gives up 3 runs in the first inning, and the Braves can never get all the way back in. They score 1 in the 3rd, 1 in the 4th, 1 in the 6th, but that run in the 6th came after the Marlins tacked on another against Morton in the 5th. So he gives up 4 runs in 5 innings pitched. That proves to be the deciding run for the Marlins, as the Braves can never catch up. And again, Miami wins by a score of 4-3. So now things are exactly where they were going into the day, even with the Mets' brutal loss to the Phillies. 2 games up on the Braves, 8 games left to play. That means the magic number for the Mets is 7. But it becomes 1 less if they win that series against the Braves and gain the season series tiebreaker. Here's how it all is looking right now. Let's just say the Mets win one of their next 2 games against the Phillies and the Braves win the final 2, which I think is probably the most likely outcome if I just had to guess. But regardless, Mets will go into that series with a 1-game lead. And the good thing is, even if they lose both, Braves win both, they're still tied. So that is the most positive outcome from this day here. The fact that the Braves aren't going to sweep the Marlins and did lose one, it does keep the Mets in that position where they will not enter that series against the Braves with a deficit, which is huge. Now, here's the math, though. If, again, the Mets are able to win one of these 2 games, Braves win them both, you go into that final series against Atlanta with a 1-game lead. If you win that series, right, you drop your magic number down by an additional 1 because you now have the tiebreaker against the Braves by winning the season series. So right now the magic number is 7. The Mets win today, it goes to 6. So the Braves win these final 2 games. The Mets lose to Zach Wheeler on Sunday. All right. You got a magic number of 6 going into that series in Atlanta. If you win 2 games, each of those games that you win, the magic number drops by 2 for a Mets win and a Braves loss. All of a sudden, you knock 4 games off of it to 2 games, but you also gain the tiebreaker, so you knock off one more. In this situation, if the Mets win 1, Braves win 2, they meet head-to-head, and the Mets win the series, all they will have to do is win a single game against the Brewers in Milwaukee, and they will clinch a playoff berth. So the Mets are still in the driver's seat here. They got to focus on the task at hand, of course, and that is the Phillies. If you win the next 2 games, you're sitting even in a better situation. If you lose 2 and the Braves win, all of a sudden you're even up. And yes, Mets can win a series. That's great. You're still going to have to win another series in Milwaukee to make the playoffs. Now, granted, that's assuming the Braves are going to sweep the Royals, and the Royals are a team that could use those games. They've lost 5 in a row. They're hanging on, clinging on really to a wild card spot. 2-game lead over the Tigers, 1-game lead over the Twins. So the Royals are going to need those games. The Brewers, the way things are setting up, probably won't need those games against the Mets. But how are they going to play it, knowing that if they just let the Mets in, they could give them momentum that would carry into a wild card series against them? So there's just so much that's on tap here to try to figure out in this final week. And that's why it's amazing the Mets are in this situation, because there's so much stakes attached to every game. Good thing for the Mets, Sean Manaea is on the mound on Saturday. So this is one of those opportunities where your ace has to deliver against a pitcher in Ranger Suarez who has struggled lately. So hopefully the Mets can score some runs for Manaea. You have a rested bullpen. Jose Butto has not been used since Monday, so he should be fresh enough to give you multiple innings. Edwin Diaz had a day off. Reed Garrett, Phil Maton also. So you got all the pitching that you're going to need in this game. You just have to beat a very good Phillies team. Hopefully the Mets can do that, because it's going to be a much tougher task to beat Zach Wheeler with Tyler McGill on Sunday. We'll talk about that a little bit in the final segment as it relates to Jose Quintana and the potential return of Kodai Senga. So I'll kind of go through the pitching a little bit in the next segment. But the Mets right now have to win on Saturday, and then Sunday's sort of a gravy game in my eyes. Last note when it comes to all of this and where the Mets currently are. There's still the MVP of the Mets to discuss. That's Francisco Lindor. What's the latest? Well, he got an injection in his back today. They called it a facet joint injection. And it's not a cortisone shot. They made that distinction. Essentially, this is supposed to increase his rate of recovery. Now, you're probably thinking, why didn't they give him this injection 3 days ago? Sometimes players don't want to get a shot in their spine. Sounds crazy, right? I think at times you don't want to rush to an injection if something could heal naturally on its own. In this situation, they decided that it was best to give him this shot. And if his back doesn't respond to it, they said that could be an indicator of something worse that the MRI didn't show. But team officials are hopeful, because after getting this shot, I guess he got it it's the day after receiving the shot. So I guess he got it yesterday. Regardless, Lindor took some swings, batting practice on the field, took more under the field well in the cage. So he's getting closer and closer. The goal is to see if he can do all of his baseball activities when he shows up to the ballpark on Saturday, in which case he might be good to go. We'll see how he shows up. I would think there might just be one more day here where they rest him, knowing that it's a day game too. So how early does he have to show up, and what's his back going to be feeling like as he goes through it all? We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. I could see a situation where they decide, all right, you're going to play half the game like we've seen them do in the past, where Acuna gets the start, and then late in the game, you pick a pinch hitting opportunity to drop Lindor in, and maybe he can turn a game for you. So we'll see how they use him. We'll see if he's available. But one thing that both Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns made clear today is if and when he's ready, regardless of what's going on in the race, they will have him in the lineup. So even if the Mets win 10-0 again, on Saturday, if he's going to go on Sunday, he's got to be in there. Even if Acuna goes 4 for 4 with 3 home runs. So we'll see how that all ends up breaking for the Mets. But what I want to talk about in the final segment is more injury updates. Kodai Senga How are the Mets going to set up their pitching for this final week? Does David Peterson's bad start change anything in their eyes? I'll go through all those things, as well as some of David Stern's comments, not only on the current team, but more importantly, the prospects of the year. So we'll touch on all of that in the next segment. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. First, talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Again, this is for all FanDuel customers where you bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And you only have until September 22nd, Sunday, to take advantage of this offer. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. First things first, the Mets announced their player of the year and pitcher of the year when it came to their farm system. To no one's surprise, Brandon Sproat was the pitching prospect of the year for the New York Mets. He was unbelievable. We've talked about him a ton throughout the season. Had a 1.07 ERA when he pitched 6 games in Brooklyn. Ends up in Double-A for a bulk of his season. 11 starts, a 2.45 ERA. Gets the call up to Triple-A. He struggled, has a 7.53 ERA there in 7 starts, but still, it has been a remarkable season for Brandon Sproat. You go into next season with Sproat in mind to be part of the big league rotation. How many innings? Is he part of a 6-man? There's a lot of dialogue that would go into that, but he'll have a shot, I think, to, I don't know, necessarily break camp with the big league club, but very similar to what we saw with Christian Scott this year, where it wasn't long into the season where after Sproat, or in this case, after Scott had showed himself well in AAA, he got the nod. I think the same thing could happen with Sproat, where maybe you have some more veterans that you go into the season with, and then once an injury opens up an opportunity, you can slide Sproat into the rotation. So he's going to be a big part of the Mets next year. I really do believe that to be the case. Now, we did a show a couple weeks back, I think, where I did talk about this player of the year, pitcher of the year. I just went through the farm system and I struggled to find a player of the year. And I think I said it's probably going to be Nick Morabito. And sure enough, Nick Morabito ends up getting the nod. He did have a really nice season. In low A, he was sensational. He hit 397, got on base at a 530 clip with a 513 slugging percentage, OPS over 1,000, stole 11 bases on 15 attempts. So after a great season there, ends up in high A, where he hit 294, got on base at a 373 clip. He also stole 48 bases on 59 attempts. Overall in the season, he stole 59 bags. He scored 74 runs in 119 games. Here's the thing about Nick Morabito. Really good hit tool. Really great athlete. So he's got a strong hit tool. He's got a lot of speed. Obviously, he's got some pretty good plate discipline. He doesn't impact the baseball at the highest of levels. That's the area that we need to see a little more growth in Morabito's game, to see him drive the baseball with some more authority and continue to progress as a center fielder. He's a really good prospect in this system. I don't know if he's top 10, probably not. I know I didn't have him on the top 10 in my most recent update. Top 20, I think, for sure, but it really is a testament to how rough of a year it's been for the Mets' top position player prospects that Morabito won this. Not to knock him. It's been a very good season, but it pales in comparison to what Jet Williams did last year to win the same award, or what Brett Beatty did. When did he win? In 2022, if I'm not mistaken, right? Other guys have had more impactful seasons as far as what they've done impacting the baseball to get that recognition. It's not to knock Morabito. He thrived in low A and he held his own and really did a great job at using that athleticism in high A. but I want to see what happens with him next year when he gets up to Double-A. How does he translate? I'll be very curious. I think that's going to be a huge jump for him to go from that high A competition to Double-A, but we'll see how he fares with it next season. Now, looking at the other position player prospects, Acuna all of a sudden is having himself a moment. David Stearns did talk about today. He said, what he had or what they had confidence in about Acuna in the minor leagues was his poise. At the moment was not going to be too big for him. We've seen that. He said you couldn't have had a start better. It's what any player would dream of, to come up in a pennant race and perform the way he has. But it doesn't seem like the Mets all of a sudden are going to force Acuna into a starting role even when Lindor comes back. I think they're thrilled with what they've got production-wise, and he could go hitless in the next 2 games, and Lindor might be out. He did his job, and right now that's just playing good shortstop. Hopefully it's just one more game before Lindor comes back. Now, a couple other prospects that were asked about by David Stearns today. They asked about Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert. He said they're swinging it well, and the most important thing is they're both fully healthy, and they had a monster game in Syracuse tonight. Jet went 2 for 3 with 2 walks, 2 runs scored. In 4 games in AAA, Jet Williams is 6 for 14 with 3 doubles and 6 walks, only 3 strikeouts. So you're seeing why Jet Williams is the top position player prospect in this system. It's unfortunate that he's only going to have the rest of this week here in Syracuse, and then I guess he'll have the playoffs, but he's not going to have a ton of time to really get more development this year, but he's going to be in the Arizona Fall League, and hopefully he can build off of a hot streak here to close out the AAA season. Meanwhile, Drew Gilbert had an even better game tonight, going 3 for 5 with 5 RBIs, had a 3-run homer, his 9th in 54 games in AAA. He's had 8 home runs since August, the last 2 months in 42 games. So he definitely has really discovered that power stroke, and that's great to see. Outside of the power, Drew Gilbert has struggled, but I don't go into next season with any diminished outlook on what he could be as a player. It's just unfortunate that he also missed that year of development. Meanwhile, Brett Beatty also was in the starting lineup at Syracuse. He went 1 for 3 with a walk, played 5 innings at third base. With all that said, the big news of the day is, of course, Lindor, but also Kodai Senga on the mend. And it really is going to be interesting to see how the Mets play it. He's going to start in Syracuse on Saturday. Now, he's going to have 30 to 35 pitches. The aim is 1 to 2 innings. How he makes it out of that is going to tell us what the Mets want to do from here. But what they have said, Carlos Mendoza indicated that he's going to pitch with 5 days rest. All right, so you line that up. That means he would be potentially in line to be activated next Friday for the beginning of that series against the Brewers in Milwaukee. Okay, let's just say he passed the test, right? Throws 32 pitches, 2 scoreless innings, strikes out 4. Awesome. Now he's got 5 days rest. The Mets are going to activate him to start that game in Milwaukee after their series against the Brewers. Hey, maybe everything worked out and the Mets clinched or are right there to clinch. They're a game away from clinching. They just have to win 1 in Milwaukee. Perfect. Well, now you see what you have in Senga. He gets this start. Let's say he gets up to 45 pitches. Perfect. He increased by 15. That's typically what you do when you're bringing a guy along. That would mean that he would be available on October 3rd, which just so happens to be game 3 of a potential wild card round. And he might have 60 pitches to give. Now, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if the Mets are fortunate enough to be in that position, meaning they have made the playoffs and they've won one of the first 2 wild card games, and it comes down to a deciding game 3 against the Brewers, are you rolling with Kodai Senga with 60 pitches, or are you going to start David Peterson or Jose Quintana? It's a tough decision to make. I think the Mets, assuming he looked great, he would have had to have looked great in Syracuse and great in Milwaukee. And if he does, then I think you got to roll that dice and still go with the best upside arm, and that would be Kodai Senga, knowing that you would have someone like David Peterson ready to back him up, something he has done in his career. What's interesting is David Peterson now has 2 bad starts in his last 3. And that is something that I wonder if it starts to factor into the minds of the powers that be for the Mets. Because if you want to, you don't have to start David Peterson against the Braves. Tyler McGill is going to start on Sunday here against the Phillies. And that could be to be all hands on deck against Atlanta in what's essentially a playoff series. Not that this one isn't as well against the Phillies, but I've talked a lot about the idea of maybe having Jose Quintana piggyback McGill on Sunday to get him used to that type of a role, set him up to still pitch in that series against the Brewers, knowing that they were going to roll with Mania, it'd be Severino first, then Peterson, then Mania against Atlanta. I wonder if this start changes that, where maybe the Mets say, you know what, let's go with Jose Quintana to open up the Braves series, Severino, Mania, and then set up Peterson for that Milwaukee series. It'll be interesting. I don't know what they decide to do, but the way Quintana has been pitching, I wouldn't put it past the Mets to do that. That would also give Luis Severino an extra day's rest. So as much as originally I thought David Peterson was definitely going to start in this Atlanta series, I think that the order might change. They might go with Quintana, and then you go with Sevy and Mania in those final two games of that series. It's going to be interesting. That would set up both of those guys to pitch on regular rest in the wild card round. Mania, Sevy, game 1 and game 2. Now, if you start Severino game 1 against the Braves, you give him an extra day of rest for that series. So we'll see what the Mets decide to do here. First things first, Shaw Mania on the hill on Saturday against the Phillies. You win that game. I think that puts you in a really good spot. Sunday's a gravy game. You win that one, and you're cooking with gas. And you never know. Maybe the Marlins have a little more spoiler in them and could take another game, or maybe even do the impossible, and the Braves just collapse. It's going to be a fun end to the season here, and I'll be with you every step of the way. I will have another show for you tomorrow morning. So make sure, if you are listening on the audio side, you follow, you rate, you review. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe. The goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports, with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.